So right now you're working in LA.
Yeah.
You've been here for 5 months?
Yeah, since the end of August.
How does it feel?
It's so weird, I think, just because of the times we're in, that...
You like, let me get this going. I was like,
distracted by the call.
I love how quietly you did that. How long were you in New York?
I was there 4 years.
Oh wow, that's a good amount of time. That's a season.
It's a whole season, yeah. Right after college, extremely
I feel like I can see the trauma like reawakening behind your eyes.
A woman who lives right here, sometimes we kind of like make eye contact and she's got a ring light, so I know she's shooting something. And then the other night, kind of the blue hour, I saw her on the roof with her ring light.
Yeah, she's a creative.
So she had like a mirror. I think she was shooting herself with a mirror and a ring light, but roof.
Professional.
It does stand out a lot in my mind because it was my first teaching job and then my second teaching job, both in the South Bronx in New York. I moved there right after school in St. Louis, 21.
Wow.
When I was like getting trained to be a teacher.
This is such an HBO show.
That was very intense and memorable, and then I was at that school for 2 years.
Did you want to move to New York especially, or you just happened to go to New York?
It was always on my radar, and a lot of people who I was close with in college moved there, and so it was kind of this natural progression. Also, my partner was moving there. I grew up in Chicago, and
you get in all the major cities. You can do like a Chicago versus LA thing too.
Right, but it's not like Chicago that much at all.
How do you feel about LA versus New York? Which one do you prefer and why?
Life circumstances are so essential in making those comparisons. Yeah. And also, I didn't move here from New York, which is also important because I also find that there's this very bi-coastal attitude here, right? It's like if I'm a New Yorker and an LA person, there's nothing in between. It's like I'm bi-coastal. I left New York in terms of living there. I haven't lived there since 2015, so it's been a while.
Okay.
My image of it is also what I have from
an Obama era image.
An Obama era, me teaching era. If I wasn't teaching, I was going to grad school at night, constantly feeling kind of that angst and anxiety, thinking about my students. That really defined a lot of my experience. I remember when I would leave my apartment in the morning in New York, I would have everything on my back that I could possibly need in a day. I feel like when you're leaving home in New York, if you're coming back, it's for the night. That was my perspective.
Every day is a journey that you embark on.
It's a lot of like, all right, do I have my breakfast? Do I have my lunch? Are my gym clothes in here? Do I have my computer? Anything I could possibly need for school? My Metro card? Do I have my winter clothes?
Sense of self. I talked about this a little bit in my 1 year in LA video, and how because so many people move to LA, especially to be like actress, model, there's a lot of folks who look like you, who are doing what you're gonna do, who are equally as talented, if not more so. So just like really to know what you are bringing to the table, who you are. I feel like New York is very similar.
Let us not forget natives to both cities who like that is their home. There's lots of people who are not necessarily pursuing the creative dream.
Would you say it's like 70-30? Like 70 local, 30, or like 40? 60.
I don't know. We should look that up, honestly. But
we're not looking things up on this channel. We're just operating on vibes. How much do you think the city and the vibe of New York contributed to stressed feeling? Because I feel like you could be in LA and you could be teaching and go to grad school. Sure. And maybe like the sunshine would be like, oh, another beautiful sunny and 70 day in LA.
Well, I don't think of it all associated with stress. I just think of it as having to move with purpose just because of the nature of my life there. During those times, I would walk by people like sitting, I'd look in windows and people were having happy hour and looking so calm or chill, and I was like, oh, you know, I just cried on the subway. Like I just cried on the metro. Like I literally just cried on the subway. Again, I don't think it's an automatically stressed feeling, but at least New York for me, it's not an easy or obvious place to move around or get around. So it's like, I want to know where I'm going. I want to have a plan to get there. What am I going to do on that ride? Is that the only time I'm going to be alone that day? Even though I'm surrounded by strangers. Am I going to listen to a podcast? Am I going to weep gently? Yeah, all of the above sometimes.
We love a gentle weep. We love a quiet sob.
Just having like a pretty high comfort level with big cities. I know that I'm a small fish in a very big pond, but that doesn't mean that I don't believe that people can find a real sense of self in whatever niche or community that they've carved out for themselves in that city. It's just kind of human nature. Whenever we're comparing ourselves or finding a sense of identity, we typically tend to do it with the people in our most immediate surroundings. I was actually just reading something about that. We have a hard time conceptualizing a comparison between self and something that's many, many degrees removed from us.
What's an example?
Well, the example in this podcast I was listening to was about like humans supporting each other, and the fact that if you hear that your neighbor's daughter fell in a well, you're gonna immediately drop everything you're doing and like try to help pull this young girl out of the well. If you hear that there is a genocide in a country that you're very unfamiliar with, you may change the channel because you're bored of hearing it on the news every night. That's a very dark example, but I think the way that in relating it to sense of self, it's like, how can I be my truest self in this immediate surroundings, in the spaces in which I'm operating? And I think that's just how I approach it, because I'm very used to being in a large city. I can't relate my sense of self with an entire
the whole city. You're not like a Chicagoan, you're not a New Yorker, an LA, or like you're who you are moving throughout these different spaces.
Yeah, I think I am all of those things. I think I definitely carry aspects of those spaces, but the way that I see myself relating to those spaces are often in the immediate surroundings. It's a lot if you start comparing yourself or thinking about how similar someone is or how much they have to offer that you don't have, or that you offer the same thing, because that other person is not in this space and in this occupying this body and this time right now. That would be exhausting and impossible. Yeah.
Are you able to like reflect on your time here in LA?
I feel like you always tease me because I'm always outside. You're always like, you said every time you hit me up, I'm like, I'm outside.
Yeah, just hiking, trip somewhere.
I do really love that about being here. Honestly, every day I'm just like, I do want to be outside whenever I can be.
Yeah.
And I think that's also in direct response to my computer-facing life currently. I just love that the sunshine allows for that. I know it's, in a way, it's cliche, but my phone still tells me, it'll tell me the weather in like Chicago or New York. The other day it said 1, and I was like, 1?
I have never in my life seen the number 1.
It's not like an accolade that you want to see.
No.
I love that I can just take a walk, like a meandering walk around the neighborhood, or I've several times found parks just like randomly, and we'll just walk around, just getting on a mountain real quick. You can just go take like a 2-hour hike and then come back down, especially because most things have been closed. It's also just fun to see the way that, I think in both New York and LA, the way that people who aren't living here are just drawn to coming, and you'll have guests and visitors just by default of having a space here. I really, really like that sense of community that you find in both. When I was at that second school, I'd also finished my master's, so got to kind of reconnect to my own creative. I got to join a choir. I joined a chorus.
You were in a choir?
Yeah, in New York. Part of my...
Was Sister Act set in New York? Whoopi Goldberg.
Regardless, that was not my choir. It was
Are you singing some old Negro spirituals?
In all the choirs I've ever been in. Yes.
Have you sang Swing Low, Sweet Chariot?
So many times. So many times. I was in a choir in Chicago more recently that was a lot of gospel and
This is your lifestyle. You're just regularly in choirs.
Yes.
Oh. Why? Are you gonna get in one here in LA?
I would love to when things open up, yeah.
I think I could be in a choir.
You totally could.
Thank you.
The one I was in New York did have auditions. It was called the Young New Yorkers Chorus. They had a mixed ensemble and then they had a women's ensemble. So I just remember being like, oh, okay, I have space, mental and emotional space to audition for this, to attend like a weekly rehearsal, and a really great friend of mine in that choir as well. Yeah. So that
also singing in community is just wonderful. Oh, like you just all on the same like vibrational level, and you're forming this community. And you're like creating pure art. It's awesome.
I mean, I know you talked about it in your moving to LA video. What do you think you've learned in terms of sense of self and finding like the niche where you're just being yourself?
I think more emboldened actually, because the more I meet people, the more I see that everyone who has been like lauded in our culture and really brought to be a big deal really is just a normal person. It's truly like in one aspect just their job. Like my job is like I go over here, I like say my lines, I'm like an actor. Like things just seem very glamorous when you're not in it, walking through it every day. Even now when I walk through a set, I'm like, ooh, a set! Look at this is fun! But it's just very much like, I don't know, it's just very much like people just their job, just their life. And I think that's actually made me feel better about my ability to be successful, because I'm like, I know what I'm bringing and I know that I have both the skills and talents to be successful, but also like the charisma and the charm and the personality and just the confidence, as you can see, to be successful. So I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be okay. And that it's not really, like obviously like there's luck involved in these things, but it's not that complicated. You kind of just like pick a lane, work hard at it, don't give up. And if you are good and you have that mindset to keep growing, think that's what's going to happen. It's just maybe, like, some people might seem overnight, but for the most part, it'll just be like 10 years from now. Like, people will know, people will watch this video and be like, oh shoot.
Remember when I think a big part of my own self-identity is a curiosity in others' identities. It's what I love about living in big, complex, messy cities and being invited into spaces that aren't necessarily my own community or ones that I feel so lucky to get exposure to. You know, I'm even thinking about in New York, I'd sometimes leave my school in the Bronx, and then I had a really good friend from childhood who was a copywriter for Broadway shows.
Oh, wow.
And so she would sometimes invite me to reviews.
Ah.
And so some of the shows flopped immediately, but we'd be like, remember when we saw that show? I never hated any of the shows because I was like, I'm seeing a show on Broadway before it's on Broadway.
That's cool.
Leaving my school in the Bronx and then going to this studio where they were rehearsing, like I said, everything is just so public. So even rehearsal spaces, like where my choir would rehearse, they were an hourly from these shared studio spaces on 34th Street. Other people are having Broadway rehearsals, right? So you hear them rehearsing in the studio down the hall, and you're in your, you know, your choir, your women's choir space in another room. So that's one thing that is really special about New York, like that shared space. If you have the curiosity for it, it's like there's literally a shared experience at every turn.
I love that. Because there's so many different types of lives happening in the city because it's so big.
So many.
You can very quickly just be in a very different situation with a very different type of person. I think here in LA, it's maybe there's more driving involved. So maybe you drive 10, 15 minutes and then suddenly you're in a whole different vibe. Because when I moved here, I lived in Silver Lake first. So when I think of LA, I think of like walking along the Silver Lake Reservoir and the gorgeous view of like the valley.
Which we
and
did that was our first
in
person.
It was so like that. I'm like, that is LA. And then now I live in a different part of town that isn't the same. It has a very different vibe. And like I got my eye surgery in like Beverly Hills. So like I'll occasionally be in Beverly Hills. It's just the valley. Like it's just so many different parts. So
and they all feel like a different
city.
city. And a lot of people told me that when I was moving to LA. They're like, it's just a series of small cities all compounded into one.
Exactly. Just under this umbrella of LA.
Yeah, even in working in the school district, so massive. The sheer size geographically requires, that cars are such a bigger part of daily life here, and you lose that natural overlap of shared space.
I want to talk about homelessness because it's major here in LA, and I feel like New York also has its own homelessness, but it's its own brand of homelessness.
Well, I think it's very visible in both places. In New York, different parts of life happen in public in New York. You interact with a lot of people on the subway who, you're seeing a lot of different intersections of humanity happening on the train or in subway stations. A lot of people are being protected from the elements on public transportation, but everyone uses public transportation. There's no class divide in that way. It's the way you get around. So it's very visible. It shows that there is a lack of affordable housing.
Does it feel different here in LA? Have you gotten to experience it since, it's been quarantined for the most part?
Yeah, it's also very visible in my neighborhood and in other neighborhoods where I've walked around. No matter kind of who you are or where, like what your walk of life is, it's visible.
Yeah.
And especially in a place like LA where people can be outside more. And I remember learning about kind of a lot of migration patterns with homelessness, of the way that people use bus travel and kind of migrate to warmer places during the winter, and a lot of times migrate out of those spaces sometimes in summer months. There are all these patterns of migration that I'm certainly no expert on, but it's an extremely visible and visceral problem in both cities, and they're two very expensive cities to live in. In New York, I think a lot of people feel like every day they're fighting this battle to be there and to spend time there and to kind of the privilege of living there, and then there's people for whom it's not a choice, and it's not a privilege. That's the lot that they've been handed right now, and there's not an adequate system of support.
So how do you feel about a city where you have to fight to be there versus a city like LA where I think you can just exist here without too much friction?
It gives it kind of an edge, or like a air of excitement. When I say you have to fight to be there, I mean you have to just really want to be there to make it worthwhile and to build a life there. I certainly find it to be a privilege that I've been able to live in multiple cities, but also important always, I think, to call out what all is happening in between in this country. Yeah, when we're doing the LA to New York comparison, I think often gets forgotten.
Yeah.
We got a whole country in between us that also has homelessness, that also has a lot of housing struggles, food insecurity, and things like that.
Okay, so you've been booed up both places. Give us any insight on the dating scene, maybe from what your friends have told you. Is the nature of the stories, are they different?
I think that in dating in any large city, there is often a mentality of abundance, right? That if it's not you, that's that's okay because
there are so many other
literally
people.
other millions of fish in the
Slight.
sea. There is definitely an increased amount of athleisure. What I see people wearing here when they walk their dog looks like my caricature in my brain of what people look like here when they're walking their dog.
Oh, interesting. You know? Like you just live up to the stereotype.
Right, I'm like, oh, the matching sets, the tiny dogs, the big sunglasses. I'm like, yes, I'm here. It makes me feel like I'm here.